Are you looking for a fun DIY home decor project? In this video, I'll show you how to create vibrant wall art with a powerful quote, step by step. Even if you're new to painting, you'll love this easy and creative way to add some personal art decor to your home. If you master these techniques, you can easily offer custom quote paintings. People love buying art with their favorite sayings or family names, and it's a great way to turn your hobby into a small business. And once you get really good at it yourself, you can even start hosting workshops where you teach others how to create their own favorite quote paintings too, just like I've been doing for the past 16 years. It's a bit of a reverse technique we're using here. First we create a background, and then later the background actually becomes the image, or you could say the image becomes the background. What I'm doing here, as you can see, just like I do in many of my other backgrounds, is blending my colors together. I'm letting them flow into each other. Then I take my dry sponge and start working the paint together a bit more. Here I'm creating a pretty large area of red because I know I need some contrast later. I need some areas with more color than others. The whole background can't be super light because later I'm going to paint the image and text in white. And if there's no contrast between the white and the background, the image and the text won't really show up. Also, I know I'm going to add lots of layers of effect, so I'm not worrying too much about making the transitions look super neat at this stage. It really doesn't matter, there's going to be lots of stencil work, drips and playful layers later. So, right now, I'm just playing with colors. I'm not overthinking it, it's all about creating some life and texture in the background. Now it's time to start adding some cool effects. Here I actually begin by adding a thin layer of neon color over the red paint. You really don't need much. Just a thin layer of color can make a huge difference once you start layering effects on top. In this case, I'm applying a slightly thicker layer because I want to use the paint for a special technique. I pick up some of the paint using bubble wrap, which gives me the double effect for the same effort. First, I press the bubble wrap into the paint, which lifts some of the color off and creates texture in the layer underneath. You might not see it super clearly right now, but it's definitely there. Then I move the bubble wrap over to the other area and use the paint I picked up to create some dots effect over here. I shift it around a bit because I really like when things sort of trail off and connect to the edges. It helps create a smooth transition between different areas, like here where the big red cloud connects down into the yellow. By blending those areas together, the whole painting starts to feel more unified. Next I add some darker yellow paint and pull it out into the red. Again, blending it carefully so the areas flow into each other. Now I'm adding some more yellow, pulling it out nicely and blending it into the red again. I'm working the colors together to create more unity between my different areas, and also over the dots I made earlier. Just a quick reminder, I've let the painting dry between layers so it's not wet anymore, otherwise the colors would just smear together. Now I'm adding some yellow again, but because there's a black line showing through from the old painting underneath, I mix in a little white paint. This canvas is one I reused from a painting I didn't like. When you mix a bit of titanium white into your color, you can get much better coverage and hide things you don't want to be visible. If I wanted, I could later go back over it with more yellow once it's dry to bring the color back fully, but in this case it's not necessary. I just continue working with more yellow here, and soon I'm going to add some fun effects. I grab a dry sponge and try blending the colors together a bit. Because the neon area is already pretty dry, it's a bit difficult to blend, but that's okay. When you have two areas where the colors don't really mix smoothly, you can easily create a transition effect instead. Here I just use a simple kitchen cloth to wipe across the paint. As you can see, it lifts the top yellow layer and reveals the red color underneath, creating a soft transition between the yellow and the red. This way, even if the paint is dry, you can still blend colors and create beautiful transitions between different areas. I'll be adding even more effects later. It's really just about playing and having fun. Here I deliberately place my stencil the wrong way around, writing the text mirrored. I move it around a bit and create some broken pieces here and there. I really like creating these little fragments, a little here and a little there. I could have chosen to add color through the stencil, but instead I decided to apply a top layer of paint and then wipe it away. It's an effect I absolutely love. Now I'm adding a new red color, just slightly darker than the one I used earlier. Again, I spread it out well so the layer isn't too thick, and I work it into the neon area to blend them nicely together. Since the background underneath is already dry, the new color just floats on top, but you can't really see a harsh separation. It blends nicely. Next, I place an oriental stencil on top, and again, instead of adding paint through it, I use the same wipe away technique. Because I already have that dry, light reddish color underneath, even though the difference between the two reds isn't huge, you can still clearly see the effect. It's just like a hidden pattern emerging from behind, and it's one of those things where you look at it and think, wow, that actually looks amazing. Sometimes you get these effects where you just know you want to keep them exactly as they are. And if there's an area you don't like as much, you can always brush a thin layer of paint over it and get a second chance to fix it. Here something interesting happens. I have some leftover paint from the red layer, but there's also some old black residue on the back of my stencil. When I use the wet cloth to wipe across, it slightly dissolves that leftover paint. And what happens is that it creates this really beautiful thin shadow effect underneath. It looks super rustic, almost like some ancient wall in Israel or somewhere like that. Now it's time to add some drips to the painting. I've just hung it up on the wall because sometimes it's easier to work with drips when the painting is vertical. And remember, if you want to create nice drips, just spraying it once with water won't be enough. You need to spray water on, let it sit for a little bit, and then spray again in the same spots. That's the only way to get the pigment to really flow down properly. You can see here, I spray it again, and soon I'll grab a cloth to help it along. What's happening is that the water starts dissolving the top paint layer. Since I've just put this color over a dry background, the layer underneath should still be yellow. And then when the drip happens, it should reveal the yellow underneath. I'm just watching it careful for a moment, because you need to give the water time to break down the paint. Now you can see how the paint starts washing away where the drips are, and the yellow background starts to show through. It's even clearer here, where I press a cloth into it and lift some of the paint off. There's not much contrast at the top, because there was red underneath the new layer, but lower down where it was yellow underneath, you can see it much better. I also use some kitchen paper here, and it's super effective. You can see how it lifts the color exactly where the drips were. So instead of creating colorful drips, I'm actually creating what you might call reverse drips, a washed out drip effect that reveals the lighter color underneath. After lifting the color with the drip sprayer, you can create a mix, some drips where the color stays and some where it's washed away. I really love the transition you can get between those two effects. Now I'm moving on to lighten this area down here where the red has become a bit too heavy. I want to bring more lightness into it. I absolutely love this stencil I'm using now. It's fantastic for creating the most amazing effects, but it's very lively, so it really takes a bit of finesse and control to use it properly. So what I do, and you can see it here, is that I simply hold the stencil firmly and scrape a very dry sponge lightly across the surface. Make sure to use the proper technique and apply the paint lightly for the best results. By the way, if you want to use the same stencil I'm using here, you can find the SVG file in my shop. The link is in the description. You'll also find the text and the gorilla design for the projection there. So you can easily create your own version of this painting if you like. And by doing so, you'll also be supporting this channel so I can keep making more fun and free videos like this one for you. Alright, let's move on. So again, here I just continue working with my yellow sponge. It's getting a little dry. That's fine because it gives a kind of a shadow effect. If you get some rough transition between the red and the yellow, like you can see here, where it doesn't blend very smoothly, you can fix it by using a stencil. Where it's red, you dab some yellow through the stencil, and where it's yellow, you dab some red. This way, you create a reverse effect that helps these two areas blend into each other nicely. Now I'm adding some yellow here with the letter stencil, and yes, apparently I decided to flip it upside down. I do that a lot. I need a lot of effects and textures in the background, because in the end, it's actually the background effects that will form the final image, so we need some action. And now it's time for some dots. At this stage, I'm really just playing around, adding a little here and a little there without overthinking it. It's always a question of finding balance, and sometimes you'll also need to know when to stop. The only reason I'm continuing a bit more here is because I want the background effects to become part of the final image. So I'm adding a bit more yellow again, just to blend everything together a little more. I want it to be something that peeks through from underneath but doesn't dominate the final painting. I really love working with thin layers of color on top of what I've already done. And with yellow, you can usually glaze right over unless it's a very opaque yellow, like one mixed with a lot of white, as you can see here. If there's a lot of titanium white in the mix, it will have more coverage. Right after adding yellow over my orange base, I splashed some water onto the canvas, just like I did earlier with the drip effects. Basically, I'm creating some reverse splatter effects. You can see here how my cloth picks up the water droplets. I just gently press the cloth down into the surface and it lifts the paint right where the water landed. It's not super obvious here because the colors underneath are quite close in value. If the contrast had been greater, like if there were a dark red underneath and a much lighter color on top, the effect would be even stronger. You can create some amazing effects with this technique. Green on blue, yellow on green, white on purple. There's so many possibilities. You just have to play with it and see what happens. Now I have just added a few final effects and a little neon in the background to brighten up the colors. Now I start sketching out my gorilla. Since I know I'm going to paint the background white later, I'm using a white Posca pen to do the sketching. It's really important to have Posca markers that matches the paint of color you plan to use. I'm not saying you need every single shade imaginable, but try to get as close as possible to your main color. I've now sketched out the gorilla, and I've also prepared the quote text, which I made to fit about half of an A4 page. That gives it a more elongated shape, which matches the proportions of the canvas I'm working on. If you have a square canvas and you only want a quote on half of it, you can create a square document and size the text accordingly. And if you want to paint along with me here for the practice, please click on my link in the description. You can get the files I'm using here for only a few dollars and support my channel so I can make more free tutorials for you and others. Thank you for the support, I really appreciate it. Just remember, if you want to make your own document, the text needs to be a bit taller if you only want it to fit half the space. It's something you need to think about when you're designing your own layout. Now I'm starting to paint around the main image, the background. I mixed in a little water to make the paint easier to work with. This way, you can still sense some of the background effects showing through. If you want a smoother and more even layer, you can also buy fluid acrylic paint, which flows better and is naturally more transparent. This will give you a more consistent finish. Right now, my goal is to carefully paint around everything, the text and the entire gorilla, to create the negative space effect. If you notice the white paint starting to look patchy, or if there's an overlap, you can simply take a dry brush and gently blend the edges together. That helps soften the transition and keeps everything looking nice and even. Alternatively, you can also buy a painting medium that keeps the paint open and workable for longer. For example, Golden makes one called Open, which give you more time to blend and work your colors together. In this case, I just use regular studio quality acrylic paint though. You can definitely do that too, with good results. I can still slightly see my background effect shining through, without the white layer being too heavy or covering everything completely. Over by the gorilla, where the contrast between the white and the yellow isn't as strong as it is in the letters, where it's white against the red, I'll go back later and add a little more color right along the edges of the sketch. That way, the contrast will stand out a bit more sharply, if you know what I mean. You'll see me doing that in a moment, just adding a second layer to strengthen the contrast where it's needed. Also, you might notice that I spelled off wrong. It was supposed to be two O's, and I'll fix that a little later too. Sometimes we make funny mistakes. I've even sent paintings with spelling mistakes off to the gallery before. It's so embarrassing, but it happens. Maybe not to everyone, but definitely to some of us. And I've had plenty of students make spelling mistakes too. The important thing is just to laugh about it, fix it as best as you can, and not cry over spilled milk, as we say in Denmark. It's all a part of the creative process, and every little mistake teaches you something for next time. And now the painting is almost finished. You can see I'm coming back to the gorilla again, carefully painting at the negative space around it. This technique is called a negative effect, because instead of painting the actual image, I leave the image untouched and paint around it. It's a really fun way to work and experiment with your designs. Here the contrast isn't super strong yet, so later I'll add a thin orange outline around the gorilla with a Posca pen, just to make it stand out more. Right now the gorilla looks a bit too faded, because the background behind isn't that dark. But I actually really love that you can still see all the little dots and the mask pattern details behind the monkey. I just love effects. I just love effects and I just love effects layered on top of effects. The effects on effects. effect. The effect, this is hard to say. I just love effects layered on top of effects, the effect on effects. The effect on effects, the effect. If you can call it that. I'm sorry. So now it's just about finishing up the final details of this first layer. All these little details, they are honestly the boring part. I can't pretend otherwise. But they're necessary if you want to create really cool paintings of your own. That's just how it is. Now I'm grabbing my Posca pen again to draw in all the little lines and details. It's a bit fiddly work, but as you can see, it really helps define the edges and adds a darker outline, which boosts the contrast just a little more, making everything pop and become more visible. Now I'm fixing the little mistake I made earlier. I start by drawing an extra O where it was missing and an F where it belongs, just using the same white marker. There's no need to bring out the projector again for something like this. You can easily fix small mistakes by eye. After that, I'll go in with the red paint, matching the background color as best as I can to help blend the correction into the original background. It can be tricky to get the exact color match, but just do the best you can. Then I add another layer of white over the top. Of course, it's a little more opaque and noticeable at first compared to the original white area, but I'll work it gently into the background so it fades out a bit. That way it's not obvious that anything was corrected, and honestly, when you look at the painting as a whole, especially from a little distance, you really can't see the mistake anymore. And now my painting is actually finished. Here you can see how it looked before and after I corrected the mistake. I really don't think it's a problem when you view it from a distance. I'm perfectly happy with how it turned out. What do you think? Let me know in the comments, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye for now.